Dear friends and students, we have with us Professor Mohan Rao, who taught for long years in JNU in the Center for Medicine and Community Health, the School of Social Sciences in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Again, Mohan Rao, so while I studied in JNU, I had not met Mohan Rao. I met him at a point when I brought a set of students from Kashmir to JNU, and I don't think he would have a memory of that moment. So this was for an exposure to people, students who study in a local government college in Kashmir, sort of introduced them to central universities in Delhi, and Mohan invited us to his house. I think the meeting happened in his house or his office. I'm not. It's not clear. I have a vivid memory of that moment. The amiability of a professor, of someone who was accessible in JNU, and someone one that he had always something interesting to sort of tell us, even about the vicinity around JNU. I remember he introduced me to a place called Kamali Jamali Monument in the
Jamali Kamali.
Jamali Kamali, it is. That particular one, which I didn't have any always had something interesting to tell us. So here we have him talking, to us about populationism and Love Jihad. So Mohan Rao's, in terms of his background, he's a medical doctor who has sort of one foot in sociology or in social sciences. I mean, it is a critical way of looking at sort of objects which we have medicalized or turned apolitical by rendering them technical. So Mohan's it's a critical site to occupy, and it also gives us a sense of how there can be a sociology of practically everything. So with that sort of introduction, I would over to Mohan Rao, who will sort of introduce his paper.
Thank you, Gohar. Thank you all for coming here. What I'll first do is show you, before I start my talk, show you 4 slides, this data from historical demography. And I think it's important to have a look at this data because the lesson it gives you is something that none of us really has given attention to. Historical data gives you a profoundly un-Malthusian idea of the relationship of population to resources. And that I'd like to emphasize here. This is Livy Bakchi's data. And if you look at world population, average growth rate, doubling time, etc., over a period of time, and I'm going to add something to this, and you'll have to only take my word for it. Okay, and that is average life expectations, which is an index, let's say, a crude index of the health of populations. If you add one more column here, the first health revolution, when average life expectations go beyond 22 years, don't look shocked. 1901, India's average life expectation was 22 years, a profound commentary on what colonialism had done to us. The first historical health revolution, when average life expectations climb above 20 years, 22 years, is with the further development of predominantly agricultural societies 10,000 years ago. Now, till this period, globally, the experience of what are today called third world countries and first world countries were similar in terms of deaths, births, population growth rates, and so on. The big difference between what we call the first world and what's called the second world comes with the second health revolution, that is with the industrial revolution in the West. In the West, average life expectations then climb above 45 years. Now, this is important here because there's a divergence between the West and the South, populations in the South then begin a long-term secular decline. In Africa, it is due to largely slavery. In Latin America, it is due to the introduction of new diseases. Whole populations are wiped out. And similarly, in other colonized countries, epidemics of diseases, famines, etc., populations begin to decline. So there is then around this period in the West, population's average life expectation increases above 40 years, and in the South, they begin to decline. So that difference between the North and South persists to this day. So this is very important. What you therefore see in this slide, coupled with average life expectations, is that with population growth, average life expectations increase. Okay, and this is a profoundly non-Malthusian understanding of the relationship between population and health. This second slide is the American Academy of Sciences, where they plot different nations, a relationship between population growth and economic growth, economic development. And what you have here is what is called a scatter diagram, which means that there is no systematic relationship between population growth and economic development. In other words, you have countries where there is population growth accompanied by economic growth. You have other countries where you have population growth not accompanied by, so there is no Malthusian relationship over here at all. So this is a well-known figure on growth of populations around the world. Population growth, you will see from this, is a relatively recent phenomenon accompanying the modern world, modernity. This last slide is very important because you must have repeatedly heard about how population growth is eating into resources, and it's population growth which is causing climate change, it is population growth which is depleting the environment, and so on. I think population growth is the wrong index to use here. What this shows you is what's called a champagne glass appearance, that the lowest 20% of the population consumes 1.4% of global income. And so even if it is true that this is the section which is growing the fastest, and that is not empirically clear. So it means that they're eating so little of global resources that they contribute very little to anything at all that you would like to have in mind. So the index that we should be using is not population, but effective population. That is to say, population multiplied by consumption. If you start looking at effective population, you begin to understand that it is the rich in rich countries and the rich in poor countries which are causing the maximum damage to the environment, to the depletion of resources, and everything. So I hope these 4 slides are very clear in your mind, and these are important, and I will now begin the rest of my talk. The rest of my talk is actually a bit of a continuation of what Ram Guha spoke of in the morning about creating demographic anxieties. I don't think you need to have this here, do you? Anyway, it doesn't matter to me. Okay, I would like to start with a poem entitled Killing Conscience with Arithmetic. Could men but come awake, enchantments keep, their noblest faculties held fast in sleep, and frightful dreams and real fears, alas, before their soggy, haunted vision pass, not least the Reverend Thomas Malthus, with his trick of killing conscience with arithmetic. This is a poem written by James Macaulay, which is in a classic book by Colin Clark, Population Growth and Land Use, which those of you who are interested in this issue must read. Okay, There is an anxiety among elites in our country about population growth, the belief that this lies at the heart of a range of social and economic problems that we face. This belief enjoys widespread appeal in the media and among middle-class professionals, including, of course, among doctors. What explains the enormous appeal of this argument? Is it propaganda over the last 50 years, initially stemming from the West and now deeply internalized in our country? Do they arise from other atavistic anxieties about tribe and race? Do they arise from their evident simplicity in explaining a deeply fractured world? Why are they such overwhelming tropes in the discourse of fundamentalisms of various sorts? Does neoliberalism provide them with impetus? Why are they entangled with other anti-feminist discourses? How do issues of identity get imbricated in this? What political functions do they serve? The creation and hardening of prejudices and of fear. In neo-imperial times, creation of fear is a growth industry with sometimes utterly transparent political ends. I begin this paper attempting to explain the neo-Malthusian appeal by examining the astonishing case of Anders Behring Breivik. On the 22nd of July 2011, following the setting off of bombs in central Oslo, this young white man cold-bloodedly killed 69 young men and women attending a youth camp organized by the ruling Labour Party at the island of Utøya, not far from Oslo. He wanted to draw attention to the dystopia that awaited Norway because of the appeasement of Muslims by what he called, with utterly no irony, multicultural Marxists. When the bombs went off in Oslo, the New York Times reported, and everyone assumed, that this was the handiwork of Muslim terrorists. When the terrorist was identified as a white supremacist, the explanations quickly proffered were the familiar. While not all Muslims were terrorists, most terrorists were Muslims. But of course, this is equally untrue. In 2007, 2 out of a total of 581 terrorist attacks in Europe were carried out by Muslims. In 2008, not one of the 441 documented terrorist attacks was by a Muslim. In 2009, there were 294 terrorist attacks, of which 1 was committed by a Muslim. The vast majority of terrorist attacks, 237 out of 297, were perpetrated by white, non-Muslim separatist groups, mainly in Spain and France. What is interesting is that Breivik, a right-wing Christian fundamentalist, has left a 1,500-page manifesto entitled 2083, a European Declaration of Independence, an event he was attempting to usher in by his barbaric act. This is available on the net still. It shouldn't be. The year 2083 that he chose is also symbolically interesting. It represents the 400th anniversary of the Battle of Vienna in 1683, where the invading troops of the Ottoman Empire suffered a defeat, ensuring that most parts of Europe did not come under Islamic rule. It is equally interesting that a Polish king took part in that holy battle. Today, of course, Poland, ruled by extreme right-wing, is seen as the heart of pro-family values, a Catholic nation besieged in a Europe that is awash with feminists, pro-abortion, and gay rights people, together emasculating Christianity as much as the Christian male. Poland, it is believed, is the last bastion of pro-family values that will rescue Europe from demographic doom that awaits it if women refuse to breed. The 2008 World Congress of Families was held in Warsaw, where the film Demographic Winter was screened. The film, echoing Mark Steyn's best-selling book, America Alone, The End of the World as We Know It, predicts the death of European civilization and the extinction of her races, too self-absorbed to breed, as they are engulfed by tides of Muslim immigrants, leading to transformation of Europe into Eurabia. This will, it is argued, lead to the paradoxical situation of the future when European feminists will be ruled by Islamic patriarchy, robbing them of reproductive choice that they now exercise to weaken the family, the nation, and the race. One other best-selling book is Leon J. Podol's Church Important, the feminization of Christianity. Breivik has a solution to the problems posed by Podl. The issue of the hypermasculine Muslim male and the overfertile, oppressed Muslim female is, of course, familiar to us, immune to long years of saffron demography. I will come back to this later. Breivik believed that Norway would be a Muslim majority country by the year 2050, since, according to him, her spineless elites had, in a multicultural fit, succumbed to permit endless Muslim immigration. The fact of the matter is that on the basis of the current population growth rates, Norway will have a Muslim population of 7% in 2050, but mad imaginations are not based on facts and reasoning. Like many white supremacists and Christian fundamentalists, Breivik was a staunch supporter of Zionist Israel, which he saw as an island of Western value in a dark sea of Muslim barbarism. Christian Zionists, set to number 45 million in the USA, of course, believe that a second coming is only possible if Jerusalem is ruled by Jews. It is to appease this section of the population that Trump transferred the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But for Breivik, Israel needed to be supported for another reason: demographic war being waged on it by Muslims, even as Israel goes out to undo the Oslo Accord through illegal settlements. The connection to Oslo again. Breivik is a new anti-Semite, pro-Zionist, and fiercely anti-Arab, for it is often forgotten that Arabs are Semitic too. This position too entwines with that of the Hindu right in India, of which he is a great admirer. In a curious case of the replay of old tropes, Israel is now considered the land of the free and tolerant, to gaze in marked contrast to supposedly homophobic Muslims, even as Israel, in a far-reaching PR exercise, starts funding various gay pride marches. Israel supports the gay pride marches in Los Angeles and in London, where they don't allow Palestinian gays to participate. It is not surprising that each year the VHP organizes summer camps, both in Norway and Denmark, where Islamophobic speakers of Indian origin hold forth. Breivik's manifesto devotes a special chapter to India and what he calls the Hindu Holocaust. This was the Hindu Kush Mountains, where Hindus were apparently slaughtered during the medieval Islamization of the subcontinent. This is based on the claims of a Belgian supporter of Hindutva, Konrad Elst, who is known for the advice to the West on making life for Muslim minorities so difficult that they will either give up Islam or go back to where they came from. I quote, "If the name of the Hindu Kush relates such a horrible genocide of Hindus, why are Hindus ignorant about it?" asked Breivik. He attributes it to the Muslim appeasement policies of the government of India and the rewriting of history under its behest. I quote again, "The victimization of Hindus thus not only took place historically at the hands of Muslim aggressors, but now they are doubly victimized by cultural Marxists as well, who control the government of India." His admiration for the RSS, the BJP, and the VHP is clearly related to their anti-Muslim violence. I quote, "The only positive thing about the Hindu right wing is that they dominate the streets. They do not tolerate the current injustice and often riot and attack Muslims when things go out of control, usually after Muslims disrespect and degrade Hinduism too much." End of quote. What he does not remark upon is saffron demography that so fits in with his own demographic anxieties. Not surprisingly, BJP MP BP Singhal endorsed Breivik's ideas. It is therefore not surprising that Breivik inspired Brenton Harrison Tarrant, who shot dead 51 Muslim worshippers, including 40, at 2 mosques after Friday prayers at Christchurch, New Zealand, on the 15th of March, 2019. Like Breivik, he too published a manifesto online and live-streamed the Al-Nur mosque shootings on Facebook. Calling himself a kebab removalist, he celebrated the genocide of Bosnian Muslims. In touch with far-right groups in Austria, France, and Germany, he was angered by NATO's actions to restrain the Serbian military from genocidal actions in Bosnia in 1995. Here we have then the coming together of the right-wing Christian fundamentalisms, anti-feminisms, racisms, and demographic anxieties about the dying Muslim race. Early 21st century, echoing early 20th century fears, tied now to Islamophobia and the global politics of oil. Ethnic nationalism combined with the essentialism of numbers implies that, I quote, one is in the grip of a love greater than reason, stronger than the will, a love akin to fate and destiny. Such a love assists the belief that it is fate, however tragic, that obliges you to kill. History is then reworked to create the fiction of ethnic purity in the past, in which, I quote, history is the savage play of ascriptive sympathies and antipathies, in which the natural conditions of groups of different origins is one in which they are wholly apart. Thus, invoked in the rape and genocide of Muslims in Bosnia is the appeal to concocted history, to ethnic tribalism in all its gory and ancient essential symbols. I quote, miraculous virgins made their scheduled appearance. Lurid posters show shafts of light touching the pommels of mysterious swords, or blazoning the talons of vicious two-headed eagles, as more than 1 million Serbs attended a frenzied rally on the battle site of Kosovo, where their forebears were humiliated in 1398, and here former communists rave in accents of wounded tribalisms. Ancient insignias, totems, feudal coats of arms, talismans, oaths, rituals, icons, and regalia jostle to take the field. A society long sunk in political stagnation is convulsed, puking up rancid chunks of undigested barbarism. The politics of nostalgia, of fictive identities, swirling with unresolved conflicts with neo-imperialism, create postmodern states painfully emulating the nation states imagined in Romantic Germany as a nation of folk, of people of the soil, of primordial ties embedded in an ancient culture in a fierce anti-Enlightenment discourse. This is, of course, eerily familiar to those of us in India, witness to pogroms against Muslims launched by the Sangh Parivar. As Babar has shown, communalism and racism are intertwined, often enough with cultures to produce fictive ascriptive identities. The onslaught against the Muslims is accompanied by concoction of history, which is a melange of myths and fiction, accompanied by the invention of traditions, the classification of Indian culture as essentially Hindu culture, and so on. Fundamentalist demography is built upon these layered tissues of lies and populist myths to create a political community of Hindus. As with all fundamentalisms, these are also carved on the bodies of women. Internalizing with bewilderment, hurt, and anger colonial descriptions of Hindus as effeminate, the new identity that is sought to be created is virulently masculinist. Along with the Semitization of Hinduism, there is an attempt also to make the Hindu males more virile, more dangerous, more predatory, more allegedly like the Muslim male. Could this explain the huge increase in violence against females that we have also simultaneously witnessed? I mean, much of this discussion about the effeminate Hindu arises from late 19th century Bengal. The Bengalis were really upset that they were classified as effeminate Indians as opposed to the virile Punjabis. What these people forget, so much as those who constructed these categories, as also Bengali Hindus, is that you had a large population of Bengali Muslims, equally effeminate, if you will. But they just completely forgot about that, and effeminacy was associated with Bengali Hindus as opposed to the virility among Muslims and so on. As Amin Malouf has observed, the rush for identities to seek some fundamental allegiance, often religious, racial, or ethnic, leads to murderous identities of blood. Responding to imagined atavistic fears and anxieties, we seem to be heading towards what Malouf describes as the age of global tribes. Imbricated in this is the celebration of the pure community, even as ideas of the nation are scoffed at, when development is supposed to be automatically and necessarily linked to violence. This is accompanied by a deep distrust of rationality, curiously described as Western, in a bizarre reflection from Orientalist mirrors. Embedded in this discourse are spurious ideas of oneness with nature in the pre-modern past, of equally innocent ideas of the wholeness and human affairs in those golden ages, of forgetting that a tribal past was a past of constant and continuous warfare. In short, that a tribal past, an ethnic past, a past celebrating blood ties is equally oppressive. To a large majority of women and men, the ants of these societies put to labor and set to breed. My fear is that revocations of this past, suitably reworked, would also mean a divestment of citizenship rights that tribal communities, of course, did not know about or have any use for. For as opposed to the membership of a tribe, what is at stake as citizenship in a nation? It is with this background of creating demographic anxieties that we must examine the political project of Love Jihad, as several states bring in legislation to surveil and control interfaith marriages. One of the most remarkable campaigns by right-wing forces of the last few years in India goes under the startling name of Love Jihad. Love Jihad crudely but effectively argues that Muslim men are waging jihad in India to so-called love marriages. The young men apparently waging war through love, through the capture of innocent Hindu women, are also referred to as love Romeos. Given credence by the courts and police in some states, it is argued that the proponents of Love Jihad see this as a strategy by Muslim fundamentalists to lure Hindu and Christian girls into their literal arms, thus swelling their numbers in the ongoing demographic war. The Hindu Janajagriti Samiti in Dakshin Karnataka district of Karnataka claimed that 30,000 young women had been duped by love Romeos in the state. The new film, Krea State, is it? It also gave this number of 30,000, and now they've reduced it to 3, I think. The Kerala High Court ordered an inquiry in 2010, while the Karnataka High Court in the same year stated that a case involving a 23-year-old woman who had converted to Islam to marry a Muslim man had, I quote, national ramifications concerning security, besides the question of unlawful trafficking of women. We've had a similar case, Hadia case from Kerala also. Indeed, the Karnataka High Court went egregiously further, ordering the woman to be restored to her parents while the police investigated the case. On its part, the Kerala police found no evidence of love jihad and no organization named Romeo Jihad that was executing this. The Karnataka police clarified that 404 girls were in fact missing during the period and that they had been able to trace 332 of them. The majority of them were Hindu girls who had eloped to marry Hindu men, but not men of their own caste.
Yeah, when I was there, some of them were also. Yeah, I have met like 2 colleagues.
To a section that's being
Okay.
someone spoke.
Sorry.
Some unintended.
One of the girls who was said to have been a victim of love jihad had in fact been murdered by her Hindu lover. Yet the media and various sections of Hindu fundamentalist groups such as the Bajrang Dal, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, the RSS, and the Akhil Bharati Vidyarthi Parishad have mounted a sustained campaign, including the student wing of the RSS in Delhi's JNU, which distributed pamphlets against this grand Muslim conspiracy. This is seen as one more manner in which they, Muslims, seek to outbreed us in our own country, as saffron demography so tirelessly proclaims with some evident political dividends. This has been a long and fruitful history. As early as 1909, and this was related to the partition of Bengal, but that's another story, UN Mukherjee had written a book entitled Hindus, a Dying Race, which went on to influence many tracts and publications by the Hindu Mahasabha, the parent organization of the RSS. This book seemed to meet a widespread demand, going into many reprints, feeding into Hindu communalism and helping create it. It had a special appeal to Hindu communalists at this time, anxious to create a monolithic Hindu community in the face of demands for separate representation emanating from both Muslims and Dalits. Whipping up anxiety about Muslims would be one way to weld together hugely diverse and often antagonistic castes into one community, erasing the structural divisions in caste society. Indeed, it has been noted that, I quote, for Hindu communalism, the book A Dying Race, had a more direct resonance as Hindu communalism was now preoccupied with numbers. The possibility of lower castes declassifying themselves as Hindus was a motivating anxiety behind the origins of Hindu communalism. Deeply riddled with inaccuracy, wild flights of prediction of the future with utterly no basis, the book nevertheless provided, I quote, demographic common sense functioning as a trope for extinction. Also fundamentally, the Hindu communalists believed and continue to believe that a nation is defined culturally as a Hindu nation, just as Muslim communalists believed in the purity of an Islamic Pakistan. So neatly did the communalists of both religions, Hindu and Muslims, by evoking demographic fears, subscribe to colonial definitions of Indian society. The census of the period also contributed. We must, however, remember that this discourse emerged at an embattled political space as colonialism was contested, as political classes were formed, as the working class was congealing, and early feminist ideas were gaining ground. None of these, of course, figure in the communalist discourse. I'd just like to say a few words about the censuses. Britain started its censuses in 1831, and Britain is a country marked by religious wars. Catholics were expelled, Jews were not allowed to be citizens, and so on. And yet, they never counted their population by religion. That has never happened. In India, on the other hand, from the very first census of 1881, religion was included in the classification of populations. And many, many communities in India did not know how to classify themselves. They did not know whether they were Hindus or Muslims, and they took help from whoever was available to classify themselves. There was yet another flame stoking these fears among Hindu communalists, resentful of social reform. Emblematic here was the tragic figure of the Hindu widow. Forbidden remarriage among the upper castes, she was not only responsible for the dying of the Hindu race, as she was an allurement for virile Muslim men, a danger within the sacred heart of the Hindu household, waiting to be profaned. Fitting neatly into this gendered anxiety was the communalization of the issue of the abduction of Hindu women. Indeed, this too was prominent in the form of epidemics of rumors before the Gujarat carnage in 2002. Thus, the embedding of patriarchy, nationhood, and violence against women in discourses on numbers, inscribing on reproductive bodies, women's bodies, atavistic anxieties about the future and the politics of genocide. We have had leaders from these groups opposing family planning among Hindus, claiming there is a demographic war. The leader of the VHP, and I'm sorry, it's not just Hindus, Elon Musk also believes this. He has 9 children so far. The leader of the VHP enjoined Hindus not to accept family planning as their numbers were going down, even as that of Muslims was increasing. At a public meeting attended by thousands and in the presence of the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, the leader of the Madhya Pradesh unit of the RSS claimed that the Muslim population was increasing at a rapid pace and that this, combined with infiltration of Muslims from Bangladesh, portended doom for India. Claiming that this demographic war was being waged across the world he attributed the breakup of the Soviet Union to such demographic imbalance. The same groups have also opposed access to abortion, arguing that a disproportionate number of Hindu women utilize abortion facilities. We've also had a huge and unedifying controversy erupting when the Census Commissioner announced the religious-wise data from 2001 census, failing to add that these could not be compared to previous figures since the 1991 census had not been conducted in Kashmir, a Muslim majority state. The Hindu right wing created an uproar about them outnumbering us in our own country with a lot of help from the national media. This was despite the clarifications issued by the Census Commissioner, despite figures showing that the rate of decline of the Muslim growth rate was substantial and indeed sharper than among Hindus. Martha Nussbaum has noted that the creation of virulent masculinities is perhaps a project of the nationalisms of the European variety. Emulating this project, other communities, other nations of blood and tribes are also creating masculinities of the European sort. She notes that India and Israel are both seats of the construction of this notion of virulent masculinities, both directed as Muslims, classified in colonial discourse as martial races. Those scoffed at as feminine or intellectual enough, or intellectual, not rational enough, set out to recreate themselves in colonial mirrors, creating a style of masculinity that is associated with his oppressor in the past, much as they recreate colonial definitions of history. This too is responsible for the horrors of Gujarat, as is the essentialism of numbers, as they wreak murder and rape, annihilating the female, both in themselves and in the other. The slogan, Hum do hamare do, wo panch unke pachis, won the leader of the carnage in Gujarat 2002 a shameful but resounding electoral victory. But it also ties in with the trope of the alleged vegetarianism of Hindus, along with the sexual rapacity of non-vegetarian Muslims. Tanika Sarkar notes that, I quote, there is a dark sexual obsession about the allegedly ultra-virile Muslim male bodies and over-fertile female ones, end quote. Recounting the unspeakable horrors perpetrated on Muslim women and children in the Gujarat carnage, she offers the following explanation. In communal violence, rape is a sign of the collective dishonoring of a community. The same patriarchy that views the female body as the symbol of lineage, of community, of nation, and their purity, would besmirch an entire community as impure and polluted once their women are raped. There is also the calculated and politically charged rumor spread of Muslim men luring away Hindu girls, I quote, a kind of penis envy and anxiety about emasculation that can only be overcome by violence. And finally, the anxieties whipped up over generations about Muslim fertility rates, of their uncontrolled bleeding and the dying of the Hindu nation led to the brutal killing of children, the new blood of the Muslim race. By engendering fear and anxiety about the future, what saffron demography successfully does is insidious. It evokes complicity in morally offensive policies among common people, you and me, which of course is its purpose. Lionel Penrose, a British physician who was one of those questioning the central tenets of eugenic thinking, the heritability of mental disorders and intelligence, was equally puzzled by the frequent assertion among the elites that feeble-minded people had strong sexual desires. There was simply no empirical evidence for these claims, and yet there were frequent calls for eugenic sterilization, although, of course, sterilization is not known to decrease the libido. Penrose offered a Freudian explanation that is appealing. He wrote, I quote, it's a well-known psychological mechanism that hatred, which is repressed under normal circumstances, may become manifest in the presence of an object which is already discredited in some way. An excuse for viewing mentally defective individuals with abhorrence is the idea that those at large enjoy themselves sexually in ways which are forbidden or difficult to accomplish in the higher strata of society. The association between the ideas of the supposed fecundity of the feeble-minded and the need for their sterilization is apparently rational, but it may be emphasized by an unconscious desire to forbid these supposed sexual excesses. It is, of course, well known that advocates of sterilization never desire it applied to their own class, but always to someone else. Could this equally be an explanation for neo-Malthusian ideas about the reproductive profligacy of the poor? Could this be the explanation for the irrational communal anxieties about the Muslim rate of population growth among a section of Hindus in the country? Of Love Jihad, the political dividends are, of course, real. Thank you very much. Panchali is working on this, so maybe you'd like to say something.
Well, thank you for the paper. Actually, I didn't know so much of the history. I mean, quite a bit on it, and I really enjoyed listening to it. While you were saying, I was also thinking we are talking about feminism, and we see this alarming trend about how liberal feminists are supporting such kind of policies. So I'm just thinking about Assam, for instance. The Child Marriage Act, I don't remember the name of the act, was used in a way to say that all women who married under 16, men and women under the consent age, were arrested. And when you saw the statistics, it was all Muslim men. So how feminism is becoming so carceral. And this was celebrated by the UN, the woman in charge of UN Population Fund, the
UNFPA.
Yeah, UNPF. And she was once upon a time a very staunch feminist, part of the women's movement. And you see how feminism now being incorporated, and with this carceral feminism, I'm using Love Jihad, the Conversion Act, the Special Marriage Act, the Act Against Child Marriage to come together to actually create the whole Love Jihad category, which is entering the legal language. I mean, it's not a legal category. So in a way, so many various kinds of laws are coming in. And for me, it's very shocking that so many of our feminists, women movement people are entering into this kind of a carceral feminism. And I was just trying to bring these two together while I was listening to you.
No, but you should also remember that there is at the same time a move opposing raising of the age at marriage to 21. And this relates to crime records data, which shows you that a vast number of cases of rape in our country are not in fact rape. They involve consensual sex between young adults who are not yet 18. In most cases, these are relationships across caste, and invariably the young woman's parents have lodged a complaint of rape against the partner. And all these cases fall apart. All these cases fall apart. In the meantime, the young man is jailed because of the POCSO Act, and love ruins a young couple.
In fact, these laws are called Love Jihad laws. These laws, this underage marriage, which is actually open. So what they do, what my research shows is that when an interfaith couple, when they have a marriage, they go to find out if the girl is below 16. If it is, then they prove the point. Otherwise, they can't, because there is no law preventing interfaith marriage. So laws like this are actually being used to prevent interfaith marriage, and they're now being labeled as Love Jihad laws.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for a really brilliant paper. So my question was, if you think of another period in which there were similar kind of demographic anxieties, and there was a state-sponsored program of sterilization, we think about the emergency and the 1970s. So how would you compare what happened during the emergency and those kind of demographic anxieties against the poor from at that time? and the kind of demographic anxiety that you talked about in this paper. And if we compare, do these kind of prejudices or this kind of ideology, is it perhaps more deep-seated than Hindu fundamentalism?
They are of the same kind but slightly different. I would say that the sterilization campaigns that took place during the emergency, dreadful as they were not particularly directed towards any one community. It was directed at the poor in general. And it's very interesting that during that period of the emergency, 1,774 men died from the safest of surgeries possible. They died of Nasbandi. And Indira Gandhi went on to get the UN award soon after for her contribution to family planning. So it just shows you how these anxieties are interlocked. And in fact, most of the measures that were carried out during the emergency and subsequently later in many of our population policies, which are coercive, etc., came from the advice of international agencies. And so you have this international anxiety, and that was related to many things. The whole population as a problem issue emerged in the post-Second World War period, and it was based on assertions made by Kingsley Davis with absolutely no empirical basis. Kingsley Davis's argument was very, very simple. He said in the West, death rates declined. First, death rates declined without medical intervention due to wide-ranging socio-economic changes. After a period, the birth rate similarly begins to decline due to, again, the same socio-economic factors, right? Which is empirically true as far as the West is concerned. So this whole idea that there is an epidemiological transition and then there's a demographic transition. In the East, Kingsley Davis asserted that the death rate had declined because of medical technologies, and that socioeconomic changes necessary to bring in declines of the death rate that had occurred in the West had not taken place in India. So you had a situation where medical technologies had brought down the death rate, but the birth rate was still high, and therefore you have a population bomb situation. And therefore, he said the need to bring in birth control technologies, since death control technologies had brought down the death rate. Now, the point, of course, and when he meant death control technologies, all he was speaking of was quinine for the control of malaria. Now, it is true that malarial deaths start declining in 1921. And the birth rate goes up in India for the first time in 1931. And yet from 1891 census onwards, 50 years before there's evidence of population growth, poverty in India had been attributed to population growth. So what I'm trying to say in all these health and facts are there, but they're not really guiding any of your policies. It is your prejudices and your predilections and other agendas. Now, when Kingsley Davis makes this argument, he's simply stating something. I don't know why he's saying that, because he gives you no evidence of the availability of quinine. Okay, quinine was used in cantonment areas. Professor Sheila Zerbrig, in her book on the decline of malaria, gives you very, very different explanations. Malaria begins to decline in India when famine begins to decline. Okay, and so she connects that to the growth of nationalisms in India, condemning British colonial policies for famines, and the change in the famine relief policies. And that is what brings down, when absolute hunger declines, death due to malaria also begins to decline. And she calculates the per capita availability of quinine in the country. And it is utterly negligible. Now, it is not just malarial deaths. It is deaths from very many communicable diseases that begin to decline around 1921. 1918 was, of course, a huge influenza pandemic. And so what is it in common between all these places across the country that deaths due to communicable diseases begin to decline? And that one common thread was changes in the famine policy. So there is simply no evidence that medical technologies brought down the death rates in India. Now, why Kingsley Davis was saying what he does later becomes evident when he convinces the United States House of Representatives, then the Senate, and then the President that America should support population control in third world countries as part of the anti-communist effort. He very clearly makes the argument that population growth leads to poverty, poverty leads to communism. If you want to fight communism, you must stop population growth. And so that's where we went, that's how we went. So I sort of digressed. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, so this is a sort of a digression, but somehow related. Not necessarily about populationism, but it's more effective connection between sexuality, violence, and the political. In your, how you figure it? Why is this so much investment in this, and why is it so effective as a sort of anxiety around virility and lack of it?
No, this sexual violence is pervasive in our society, and especially transgressive sexual violence. I mean, recently you've had this phenomenon in Tamil Nadu where the young Dalit men who've fallen in love with non-Dalit women have had all kinds of horrendous things done to them. And it's an all-India phenomenon. There is a great deal of violence in Indian society, is all I can say. And there's violence within the family, there's violence outside the home. It's interesting that, I was 3 countries where I could mention where our whole understanding of Islam and women is very, very bizarre. If you go to Iran, you'll find women walking out on the streets at all times of the evening, late into the night. You see women going out and eating in restaurants on their own. I just went with a woman friend and she went and bought herself some contraception. You just go there and show your card and you have access to contraception. Their maternal mortality ratio is much, much lower than India. Their sex ratios are much, they're almost the same as in any other normal country. It's normal actually. There's 100% choice marriages among urban women in Iran. There's 80% choice marriages in rural Iran. Okay? And here we keep having these ideas about how Muslim women are so, of course, they are oppressed compared to Muslim men, maybe. But they don't need, they're doing fairly well for themselves in Iran. And they will break their own shackles. They don't need feminists from outside coming and telling them what they need to do. And you have the similar situation in Uzbekistan, where I was out there recently. You see women out on the streets at 12 in the midnight. You don't have that. I mean, certainly not in North India. You don't see girls out on the road in Delhi on their own after 6 p.m. This kind of freedom that Uzbek women seem to have, and where they have equal access to abortion too. That's thanks to their Soviet legacy. But abortion is freely available to Muslim women in Uzbekistan. They don't need to get their husband's permission to have an abortion. They don't need to get their husband's consent to take contraception. So we have to rethink this whole idea of family, community, and violence. Very interesting, Ravinder Kaur's work on sex ratios in India. She's tracking about 100 odd cases of Haryana Jats who've married Malayali women. And it's ethnographic work, and she's given some wonderful examples of the kinds of changes that are taking place there. These men are all vegetarians, thanks to the Arya Samaj work there in the past. But now something new is happening in their relationships with these Malayali women, because husband and wife have now started going out on their own. And they go to malls so that the wife can eat a non-veg meal before she comes back home. And clearly she's traced what's happening to their sex ratios among their children, and they have normal sex ratios. So this whole deficit of women is wiped out in this generation, where Jat men are marrying Malayali women. And yet, if you look at what is happening with Bengali women who are married into Jat families in Haryana, it's entirely different. They're victims of abuse, they're frequently trafficked. And you have one case, for instance, this Bengali woman says, I'm very happy here. I'm very happy, they're very kind to me, nobody beats me up. But I don't get to eat rice, and I can't bathe every day, which I could in my village in Bengal. Now, the researcher asks her mother-in-law, why aren't you letting her go to have her baby at her natal home? That is the practice there. So the mother-in-law replies, they have sold her to me. I've paid more than what I would pay for a buffalo for her. What would prevent them from selling her to somebody else? It's a frightening situation of violence against women.
Any other questions?
So first of all, thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful. I think we briefly touched upon, kind of like mentioned the Kerala story while we were when we were giving a lecture. So I think my question is just to do with the role that media plays in kind of furthering these anxieties, and I just haven't been able to wrap my head around how this kind of propaganda is successful at such a large scale. Because when it comes to the Krea story, I think after a brief period of time, they were asked to change the description. Well, instead of 32,000 women, they had to change it and make it to 3. But even after that change was made, a lot of people just turned a blind eye to it and continued to believe that it was large-scale propaganda when in fact it was not. And recently, I think the Kashmir Files was given the National Award for National.
So it's not just the media, it's the government, the state which is involved.
So I just want to understand how this kind of intertwining of the media and the government, how does it work to further anxiety where even if there is evidence to the contrary, it's turned a blind eye towards? And do you think there's any way to combat it? Because the repercussions of that can be dangerous at such a large scale.
I recently met with this Dr. Kaveri Nambisan. Have you read her? She's a fascinating doctor, very unusual doctor. She also writes fiction. She's written, I think, about 3 novels, and I recently reviewed her memoir. I met her, and she's a doctor practicing in Kodagu, Coorg, where the Hindu right wing is very strong. For historical reasons, again, based on lies. She tells me that she's met a lot of people in Kodagu, her patients, men who've come, and they've all gone to Mysore, and that's quite a bit of expense to take to go and see the Kerala story. And invariably, they've all come back and they've told her, oh, do you know, anybody knows Kannada? Okay. In short, she's saying, oh my God, we never knew this was happening, and this is happening just next door to us. From now on, I'm going to drop my daughter to school and college. I'm going to pick her up. She is not good. I'm going to supervise her for every minute of her life. I will not let her go anywhere alone. Think of the repercussions it has on the lives of young women. And so it is not just the media. And in this case, the state is very much involved, and also the creation of fictive histories. In the case of Kodagu, it relates to Coorg was not part of Tipu's empire, Tipu's kingdom, right? And in Tipu's perception, they were giving refuge to the British to attack and overthrow him. So Tipu, it was an enemy country. He attacked the enemy country, and he did what anybody does to enemies in those times, right? Then in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, the Kodava's king joins the British, and Tipu Sultan is killed. After Tipu Sultan is killed, the Kodavas and everybody is given 5 days in order to loot as much as they could. And the amount of money and gold taken away from Srirangapatna by the Scottish people there led to capitalism in Scotland. A lot of money went into Coorg also. But what also went in was this anti-Muslim Tipu Sultan as a representative of all Muslims, etc. Now, this has had very peculiar consequences. Last year, for instance, the Karnataka government, before the elections, banned any mention of an auction taking place at Sotheby's in London. Sotheby's was auctioning Tipu Sultan's ring, which was stolen from his body after he was killed. I had no idea of this. So because it was banned, I searched. And I couldn't believe it. It was a big fat ring with Hey Ram written on it. So he couldn't have obviously been an anti-Hindu character. Now, in 1791, Sringeri Matha was raided by Shivaji. All the gold looted, gone. Who restored land and money to Sringeri Matha? Tipu Sultan. There's another famous temple in Dakshin Karnataka, Mukambika temple, where he's given a small idol. He's given a Shivlinga to a temple in Nanjangud because he believes that his elephant got better because of the god in that temple. So individuals are complex. Nobody is, unless you're... But now in all these temples, in the afternoon at 4 p.m., there used to be an arati called Sultan's Arati. That was dedicated to Tipu Sultan, who had gifted these idols to these temples. The Bombay government banned that Sultan's Arati and changed it. Similarly, Tipu Express was named the Vadiyar Express. And so this kind of history writing, this kind of demonization of certain characters, Tipu Sultan was in fact a very forward-looking king of that time. He supported the French Revolution, and he hoisted the French flag in Srirangapatna when the Bastille was stormed. And that is what compelled the British. They say, we must get this bastard. he's on the side of the French, because they were terrified that the French Revolution would spread. There was recently an exhibition on Srirangpatna and Tipu Sultan that I saw 2 months back at the Delhi Art Gallery. Tipu Sultan became what was, the 20th century, the 18th century equivalent of Saddam Hussein, who was demonized. And images of the fall of Srirangpatna was apparently the first global image to spread in the world. And there was so much drama around this image that people who had never been in India, who had never been to Karnataka, had never seen Srirangpatna, they were all painting images that were sold of the fall of Srirangpatna. And ironically, there's an artist who has depicted the fall of Vienna, which I referred to, as also the fall of Srirangpatna, because for them it meant no difference, just Muslims. So bearded guys are lost in a war, whether it's Vienna or Srirangpatna, it made no difference. And it was exhibited at the DAG Gallery. It's fascinating.
So going off of what she asked about the state and the media, what I'm trying to understand is what's the relationship between the state and media? Is media an agent of the state or vice versa? I'm asking this because, as you said, the government awarded then a lot of the political media.
Not just awarded, government employees were given a day off to go and see the thing. In some cases, mass booking of tickets was done.
Yeah, my question.
Entertainment tax exception in many states.
My question is going to, if we talk about state-sanctioned violence, then when we data coverage on state-sanctioned violence, then we talk about state-sanctioned.
See, you're all 2002, you wouldn't have even been born. At that time, Gujarat was in fact shown very vividly. This was actually the first time when this kind of violence came into our living rooms. And it was deeply disturbing. And it became even more disturbing when the architect of this violence won the election soon after. So what does it say about how we look at this intertwining of state, violence against people? Nobody could hide what was going on there. We all saw it. And yet you have the chief minister being elected again. So it's not just the state and media. It's also a section of the population. Why do they, I don't know why they do this. Can you tell me? I think you've just got immune to it. In India, we don't care for the lives of the poor. Would any other country have dealt with Bhopal the way we did? Or the number of pogroms we've had, our memories are. But one thing I can tell you is that women, the position of women, the centrality of women in the violence is very obvious. After the Muzaffarnagar riots, I was part of a fact-finding team. And we went to all these villages. I went even to a Khap Panchayat. And there was a female journalist at one of them. And one of these handsome Jat Khap leaders looked at her like closely and said, "Tum to Malik ho. I can tell you by your nose that you're a Malik." She was a Jat of the Malik family, Malik clan. Every village we went to, we saw posters, and it had a figure of a man, very natty, dark glasses, and behind him is a girl, prominent bindi. Okay, and the poster says, if you see anything like this, please call this number. It's a Love Jihad poster. It was posted in all the villages we saw there in Muzaffarnagar. I don't know how long they've been there. Kaun lagaya, we don't know. It's always been there. Can't always be there. It's looked quite new. And now, the interesting thing is what these Jat men had to say. These old men, one, they blamed cell phones. Women should not have cell phones. If they go to college, they should be accompanied. They can't be allowed to go on their own. Then they had a very complicated thing saying, no, Jat boys don't study. They can't study, but they're good looking. They could go into the army, they could go into the police. But when Mulayam Singh Yadav came in, he introduced reservations for Muslims in the police. So where will our boys go to study? Where will our boys find a job? A lot of them used to join the police department. Now that is gone, thanks to this Mulayam Singh Yadav. And then our daughters don't want to marry Jats. They want to marry Madrasis or CAs. We can't permit that. So against this violence against Muslims there, anxieties about women in their own communities was very, very central. The controlling of women's sexuality was very central to this violence.
So my question is around the sources of pushback of this burden of demographic anxiety that could be present in our society, or are there any examples that probably a select group of people within the community pushed back against such anxieties that, okay, these are kind of testless, they should not be promoted, even if these tendencies or anxieties are quite high right now because of state push. So are there any sources of pushback?
Well, I would say we're living in very perilous times. An academic, a demographer, who published a paper on estimating COVID deaths in our country. As soon as the paper appeared, he got a call from a former health secretary saying, I'm talking to you as a well-wisher. You should not have published that paper without Government of India's permission. Last month, he was removed as the director of the International Institute of Population Sciences. So where do you expect either academics or the search for truths or any kind of pushback? Where do you think it can come from? You know what's happened at Ashoka University. You know what's happened in my university. I worked there for 34 years, in JNU. And I'm still paying the price for that. Because on my retirement, my dues have not been released, and it's been 5 years since. So this process is the punishment. And this is to show others what we can do to you. You talk too much. I wish there was more pushback. I think the only answer to that is young people should have choice marriages. It's now less than 4% in our country.
You did talk about the anxiety, which is the national love jihad, which is obviously an oxymoron. Love and jihad can't be same. But what about the domicile registration the states do pick up whenever the election do come, for employment particularly? Because each and every state, whether it is Punjab, Haryana, Karnataka, for employment, for school or universities admission, this category is something where anxiety does exist within the states. How do you look into this anxiety?
Meaning interstate migration.
Yes.
I come from a city where this anxiety occasionally erupts into anti-Tamil violence. I come from Bangalore. And as you know, Bangalore was till 1956 two cities. One was called Bengaluru, which was largely Kannada speaking and came under the Mysore Maharaja. The other was called Bangalore, Tamil and English speaking, and came under the Madras Presidency. So you had a border in the thing where within Bangalore, where you paid your taxes and so on, toll if you want to move from one side to the other. And every time there is some issue that erupts around payment of wages, unemployment, which is pervasive across the country, it sometimes bursts into anti-Tamil violence. It's much like the anxiety Western Europe faces about immigration. They're robbing and taking away our jobs. It explains, to some extent anyway, the madness that you see going on in Assam. The whole issue of NRC, etc., patently anti-constitutional. What an exercise for all of India to be doing for 1.45 billion people. What are the kind of resources would it require? How many of you have legacy papers going back to 4 generations? So it's overtly anti-Muslim, but it's going to affect all of us. It's going to affect all of us.
Other question. So
I want an answer from you also. You try to answer your own question. I can also learn from you. I don't have answers to things. Okay, tell me your question.
okay. So the census that was supposed to be it has been delayed. I don't think it has happened. And from what I've been reading, I don't think it will happen until at least next year, which would be after the general, like the Lok Sabha election. So I just want to know if you see a kind of relationship between putting off the census and doing it after the elections, because I think a lot of the propaganda that's been going on is also overtly anti-Muslim, and if we conduct a census, there's a chance that it might not align with the anxiety that a lot of people have been putting forth about their population. So do you see any relation between?
I don't know if that is the point. I think it is more concerned with the question that I asked Ram Guha, for which I have no answers. 2025 is the year when this whole issue of representation into parliament is to be reopened. Okay, right now it is on the basis of the 1971 census that you have seats in parliament. And as it is, you have a lot of seats for what were called the Bimaru states in those days. Bimaru is 6 states. Ashish Bose called them Bimaru states. I didn't. Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, and these were the Bimaru states which had high death rates, high population growth rates, and so on. So their representation in parliament is frozen on the basis of 1971 census. If you reopen them in 2025, these states will get a lot more parliamentary seats. Kerala, which has 16, will now become 9 seats. Similarly, Tamil Nadu will come down, I don't know from what to what. Goa will come down, Karnataka will come down, Andhra will come down, Telangana is coming down. So all these southern states which brought down their population growth rates much lower and reached replacement level fertility rates. Already in 2001, when it was reopened, the southern states said, no question of reopening this question. it will be punishing states which have done well in family planning to lose our representation in parliament. But on the other hand, I firmly believe it is anti-democratic. I mean, they have huge populations and they should find representation with more members of parliament. What is the solution? Some people say the South should secede. I don't know. The South can secede or will secede. Should the South secede? I think it should. Sometimes I feel so. The first time I went to Bihar, I don't feel a South Indian. I'm a sort of pan-Indian petty bourgeois that doesn't belong anywhere. All right? But the first time I went to Bihar, I felt acutely Kannadiga. Because I'd done my fieldwork in a village for 22 months in a place called Hitnalli-Koppal in Mandya district. We had 4 buses coming in every day. We had a primary health center. We had 2 government schools. We had an agricultural output of whatever outreach office. We had an animal husbandry department that was there. In short, state presence was acute. And in fact, it was so acute that if any of, and this was largely a Vokkaliga community, and if any of the families cremated the dead, the police would arrive immediately and demand a bribe of 50,000 rupees. Because Vokkaligas did not cremate their dead, they buried them. So if somebody cremated, the assumption was that that person had been murdered. So they would come immediately and demand 50,000 rupees bribe. The first time I went into this place in Bihar to give a lecture at Nalanda University, I went into the rural areas there with my former student who took me. We went to places where the state simply did not exist. There were no schools, there were no primary health centers. The nearest primary health center was 200 kilometers away. So you go there and you find a nurse selling medicines. And Madhubani district, the district hospital, I went and interviewed the district medical officer who said things have improved a lot. I couldn't believe what it must have been like before it improved a lot. We finished interviewing him and came out of his room, and I tripped over a placenta. Because dogs are running all over. So a dog has picked up a placenta from the birth room and dropped it off here. I interviewed 12 women who are making their livelihood in the district hospital area by picking up and selling used syringes. So that was the first time I felt acutely South Indian, because it was unthinkable that there is nothing at all there. It's nothing at all. Children are not going to school, they're just hanging around, playing out. And if you go to Kerala, this was an amazing thing in Kerala during the COVID pandemic. All schools were shut, Anganwadis were shut, but they made sure that every child going to an Anganwadi was sent home dry rations. And it reached every home. And all older couples also got dry rations. Their complaint was, why aren't they giving us cooked food?
Sometimes they also managed to do that in cities, municipal organizations. Kochi did this for sure. Food was delivered.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sure.
So yeah, we look at Love Jihad for instance, but the other side, we also see that the opposition against conversions, against the Christians. And the discourse surrounding Christian conversions, as far as I see, like it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the reality of Christianity. Neither has it anything.
It doesn't even have to do with conversions. It's just pure anti-minority spite. Because if you see the data, the population of Christians in India is declining. So if there was conversions going on, it shouldn't be declining. Simple. But you know, Christians in India are like the rest of us in India. They're also acutely buggered up because you know that there was a group of Christians, Syrian Christians, who were reaching out to the BJP in Kerala till Manipur happened.